I know what you did. All right, everybody. Welcome to RITSEC week. Anyone know what week it is? Is it week 11? 12? Something like that. 10 maybe? All right. Please go ahead and sign in at signin.ritsec.club. Make sure you do that. That'll help us out a little bit. It's just good to know kind of who's coming to the club, so that'll help us out. All right, a couple announcements. RITSEC, it's right around the corner. Very excited. A couple weeks here. There's a sign-in link. If you have a whole team, teams are 6 people? 5 people. Teams are 5 people. So if you have 5 people, you can go to this link and sign up. And then if you're like, hey, I don't have a team, but I think it'd be really fun to compete in RITSEC anyway, we got you. RITSEC solo, and then you can just sign up and we'll just match you with other solo people who also don't have a team. So it's a really good experience. You get to learn a little bit. You get to practice some stuff, and all the things we're going to talk about today is what's going to be happening to you. So that'll be fun. But it's just a great learning experience, and it's a great way to get started if you've never done anything like that. If you like to have fun, there's a Hack Fortress night at 7 p.m. on Monday. This is Matt. Are you hosting this? Alrighty, so give it up for Matt. Do you have anything to say about it?
I have so many questions. Go up there and answer.
All right, we have questions.
What's up? Oh, there we go. So it looks like we're doing a Hack Fortress night Monday to prepare for ShmooCon.
What's Hack Fortress?
Hack Fortress is a competition at ShmooCon where there's a TF2 team as well as a hacking team in which we basically just compete and have fun. We're going to take the crown this year.
What do we really need a lot of?
Good TF2 players. That's it. So come down and have some.
Who are we going against?
That's a good question. Alumni, mostly.
Are they good?
Looks like it.
Are the stakes high? I need to know about the stakes. Are they high?
The stakes are pretty high. We can't lose to alumni anymore. We will win the crown this year.
We will bring the Stargate home.
Pretty much. So, I don't know, be there, be square, have some fun.
All right. Even if you don't know how to play Team Fortress 2, you get to be on the B squad, and that's still pretty fun.
Yeah, we need
so.
people to practice B squad.
Last time was my first time playing, and the B squad won every single round except for like one. So.
Because B Squad were the hackers.
All right, RITSEC. They need some help for setup and teardown. I don't know any details on this. Does someone from Next Hop or someone who's informed want to have anything? He was here. That's not very helpful. All right.
This weekend.
It's this weekend. Simon, when's it start?
What?
When's next RITSEC start? 8 o'clock?
Check-in is 8 o'clock. Competition begins at 9. Breakfast is at 8:30.
Okay, so then 9 all day Saturday?
There at 8.
And then is it on Sunday as well?
Correct.
So when's all the teardown going to start?
3:50 is when cleanup begins.
On Sunday?
Yes.
Okay, so be there in the morning on Saturday, or probably, I think they're planning on moving everything in Friday night, or Sunday at like 3:30, and then you can help tear down. Next Hop, a lot of the people in the club are also part of our club, so they help us out with stuff, so it'd be cool to help them out with some stuff as well. So if you have some spare cycles, definitely go help them out. All right. We have a couple sponsors. So the sponsors allow us to do everything here for you. These are all our platinum sponsors. The sponsors give us money, they give us resources. They allow us to run these competitions because we spend a lot of money on hardware and computers and all kinds of fun stuff for you guys. So these are the people that make it possible. So we have all the platinum sponsors, and here's all the gold and the silver and the bronze. So just give it up for the sponsors. All right. I don't know why this slide's here. No one will take credit for this slide, but it's in our slide deck, and I think it's promoting nominations for eBoard. I don't know. Why is it in here?
Who you guys got? There's going to be poor workplace, so who you guys got? Yo, I like the one on the left.
All right.
Yeah, he looks warm.
All right. So if you want to follow along on these slides as we go through, you can pull this slide deck, week 10 slides at ritsec.club, and you can just kind of follow along if you like to read some of that. All right. Today we're going to be talking about Linux offense. This is my favorite topic as the chief of the red team. I think it's a lot of fun. It's pretty much what I've been doing for the past couple years. Move fast and break things on the last day. Hopefully on the last day. There's sometimes it may happen on day 1 or minute 0. You never know. Just a little visual representation of how blue team, red team competitions go for you guys. I appreciate that. All right, so there's a couple different types of offense when we're talking about computing security. So ones that you commonly hear, there's penetration testing, there's red teaming, and then there's like vulnerability assessment and compliance. No one really cares about vulnerability assessment and compliance. You just go down a checklist and see what's there, what's not there. So we're not going to talk about that at all. Penetration testing, you're testing the system. So you're given a machine and you got to find your way in, or you got to find misconfigurations or problems with that system to try and get in and then test that the system or the network or whatever you're going against is secure. You can also do it against, like, there's like software and stuff that technically sort of, I don't know if that counts as pen testing. Does software exploitation count as pen testing? Testing, yeah? Okay, so software also falls in. You're testing the system itself. Red teaming, and this is a very loose definition, and it varies depending on where you go, but kind of how we always consider red teaming around here is you're testing the blue team. So you're not testing the system. The system is probably secure or probably insecure, depending on what environment you're in or the competition, but instead we're testing the people that are trying to defend it. We're pushing their skills to the limit, trying to give them a good challenge so that they will learn from this. And that's like what you hear, like RITSEC and everything, the competitions we talk about, that's what these are doing. We're not really testing the system or the network. We already know the network. We know the layout. We're testing the blue teamers that are coming up to defend against us. All right, so pen testing, try and find lots of vulnerabilities, own as many things as possible, try and find everything wrong, and then show why they're wrong, like show the people, hey, this is why we don't configure something this way, this is how we get in through this, and then you write reports on what you found, and you try and articulate the information that, like, this is what you need to change, and this is how you need to fix it, and then you show that to the people that are going to go through and kind of fix the system or clean it up after you. You focus on vulnerabilities, outdated software, credentials, privileged users that shouldn't be there, or like maybe someone's logging in with domain admin when they shouldn't be, that kind of thing. Network misconfigurations, things that get more information about what's going on, like SNMP. Web app vulnerabilities, executing code or cross-site scripting, stealing cookies, that kind of stuff, things you shouldn't have. And then human vulnerabilities, so like phishing, plugging things in, getting someone to do something for you, tricking someone into believing you. All that kind of constitutes penetration testing. You're testing this whole system. Red teaming, our goal instead, we're going to do a lot of things to the system. We're going to make sure they can't lock us out. We're going to try not to get caught. We're going to try to be a little sneaky. And then we're going to write reports on what wasn't found. So in this way, it's not necessarily like, hey, do this to make your system better. It's, hey, go look in this spot next time. Or maybe you should be reading the log files. Or if your SIM was checking for this, you would have been able to catch this attack instead. So we're testing the blue team here. In this, we always kind of focus on having a way back in. You never want to lose access to the box. You want to misconfigure things to allow you to get in through that. So like that's part of getting a way back in, is just making another back door for you to get in through. And then sometimes you like to mess with the blue team. Although this is more for competitions. In real life, you don't really want to be like sending dancing bananas to the blue team, but it works in a competition and you can get away with that. All right. Couple more definitions here for you guys. Vulnerabilities, they are a weakness or a flaw that could allow an attacker to get in. It could be like a coding error, something very simple, like just, I don't know, using printf wrong or something, or misconfiguring a service to allow default logins, things like that, weak credentials. The exploit, that's a tool or an action to take advantage of an existing vulnerability. So when you hear vulnerability, a vulnerability by itself is not necessarily bad, unless it has an exploit to, it's bad, but it's not terrible unless it has an exploit to go with it, because the exploit is really what allows you to get in and do stuff with that vulnerability. Metasploit modules, that's what these do. They take advantage of vulnerabilities and they exploit it to get code on the system, to give you a shell or something along those lines. And then there's a threat, and this is someone or something that means to cause you harm. And in this case, when we're talking about Linux offense, you are the threat. Your goal is to get in, your goal is to do this, your goal is to do whatever you need to do, test the blue team, test the red team, or test the SIM or the tools or whatever, but you are the threat in this situation. You are the one that's going to be using the vulnerabilities and exploits and such. In order to be a good threat, you do need to know your goal. If you don't know what your end goal is, you're not going to know what to do. So you need to know your goal as you go into this kind of stuff. All right, now we're getting to the fun stuff. Linux has a ton of stuff just to mess with. There's some like really simple systems like cron and bashrc, just a file laying around that does something. And there's like really complex systems like systemd, there's PAM, there's all kinds of different systems that are going on. But there's just a ton of things you can do wrong. It's easy to break a lot of things, but it's also easy to intentionally change things so that the red team has more access or more rights or more privileges than they originally should have. So one of the things we look to do is find legitimate things and then use them maliciously, use them against the system that we're trying to attack. But it's really easy to break things, so you just kind of have to be careful as you go through and test every single thing that you could possibly do. All right, so you've all probably seen this a billion times. This is the attack lifecycle. It's just a little mock-up. I think it was by Lockheed? I think Lockheed made this, yeah. So, Mandiant? Okay. Lockheed made it.
Has the kill chain.
Okay, so this is just like a classic visual of what's going on. So you do your recon on the box, you find some way in, you create a foothold, you escalate, try and become root or admin, look around the network some more, find another box, maintain persistence on that box, and just keep going through until you have as much of the network as possible, and you complete your mission. You steal the data, you do whatever you need to do. This is just like one visual representation of it, and there's a lot of different ways that this is theoretically talked about in the security community. Another one of this is the MITRE attack matrix. So the one thing that I really like about this is these are actual techniques. So like, whereas that little nice loop-de-loop you have going on there shows you what you need to do or tells you what you need to do, the MITRE attack matrix is like, oh yeah, if you drop something in the bashrc file, you get execution every time a user logs in. And it's more like hands-on. It's more showing you exactly what you need to do. And if you go to these links here, it's really cool. If you're following along in the slides, I highly recommend just checking out the MITRE attack matrix. It's really interesting. Some of it's really simple. Some of it's a little more complex. Some of it is like theorized and not actual, here's commands, how to do this. But it's really interesting stuff. And then the second link, this is called the Atomic Red Team. It is someone who went along to the attack matrix, and they basically wrote code to do it for everything. So they have code for Linux, code for Windows on how to implement these different techniques that are laid out in the attack matrix. So it's really interesting, but it's a great resource if you're like, I have no idea how to get started. Persistence, I don't even know what that is. Go here, and you can find some good examples for Linux and Windows. All right, so a comprehensive list of all the things that are on the MITRE attack matrix. Initial access, how do you get into the system? Execution, these are just ways to run code on the system. Persistence, these are kind of like a way back in. Maybe they kicked out one thing, you have a persistence mechanism to get back in. Privilege escalation, make your user someone like of a higher power than that you currently are. Defense evasion, don't get caught. Credential access, stealing passwords and usernames and tokens, that kind of stuff. Discovery, finding more boxes on the network. Lateral movement, moving to the other boxes that you found on the network. Collection, stealing data, databases, emails, anything that you're trying to get. Exfiltration, once you've found and collected all that information, how do you get it off the network without being found, right? How do you get it through their traffic so that they can't find you? And then command and control, this is to remotely administer the systems, remotely run commands on the vulnerable targets and to get them to do stuff for you. So these are like, that's just a comprehensive list, and basically everything that falls into this domain can be categorized in one of these areas. But it's just kind of good, just keep that in the back of your mind, and I highly recommend checking out the MITRE attack matrix. It's really interesting. All right, so we're gonna go on red teaming, and then later we're gonna hit up some penetration testing, and we'll show you guys some different techniques for each of this. So remember all those techniques I just talked about? We're gonna throw away some of them, because in red teaming, we don't actually care about a lot of them. We don't care about privilege escalation. We're probably given username and a root password right off the bat. Lateral movement, we don't really need to worry about that either. We know where all the boxes are. We know the network. Maybe some competitions will throw it in so you have to discover something, but for the most part, we know where everything is, and we're going to have root on it. And we don't need to worry about exfiltration, because the blue team already knows we're there. The blue team knows we're in the systems. We don't need to worry about like getting caught, because they know we're there. So it'd be weird if we weren't there or if they didn't catch something. So we just exfil all we want. We just shove data out into random post requests or whatever. It doesn't matter. There's no sims to catch us really, and if there is, then that's part of the competition and good for the blue team. But we're not really worried about this. We are worried about initial access. But in this case, it's a little different. It's not finding a vulnerability on the system and getting in. It's usually just running code as fast as possible on that system using the credentials that we're given. Then we're worried about persistence. We do want to evade defense. We are trying to not let them catch us and stop us. We are trying to get credentials because we want to be able to log back in using the blue team's valid credentials. And we're trying to do command and control. A lot of command and control, because we always want to have a way to make your box do things for us. If we can control your computer, then we can do whatever we want on it. So we are always trying to way to make sure we never lose control of your computer. And then collection. This is sometimes focused on, but not so much, but gathering data and discovery. Just kind of figuring out what the blue team's doing, trying to figure out, have they put up firewalls? Are they installing a SIM? Are they installing a log collector? And kind of keeping track of the blue teams as we go. But that's less of a focus, and it's very hard to do, so we're trying to get better at that as a red team, especially from RIT's perspective. All right, different techniques that we have. Preparation. This is the most critical. This is just the #1 thing to do as red team. People always come in. Who's here sort of CDT? There's a class here. Yeah, so I was in CDT last year, and I'm helping out with the class this year. And people are always like, oh, we get the red team. And then they come to red team, and then by the end of the first day, they've been kicked out. The blue teams have changed all their passwords. They found their beacon, and they killed it. They put up a firewall, and they're out. And then people are always like, oh, no, like, how do I get back in? Or this is unfair. Or, like, the blue team did their job, and then they're mad about it. Like, you didn't prepare, right? You did not put enough effort into it. You did not know what was happening. You did not write your scripts well. You did not go through everything that you need to go through in order to be an effective red team. The #1 thing you can do is prepare. If you don't know what you're doing, you are not going to be effective at what you're doing. So studying the topology or the packet, whatever information you possibly know about that network, you want to have it down. You want to have it memorized like the back of your hand. You want to be able to access any of these boxes. You want to have software written out and tested. That's the big thing, tested. That's something that we often skip. You want to have it tested out for each phase. So like at the initial deployment, you want to have software ready to go just to start running things on all the boxes. You want to talk to the, whoever's in charge, the white team, gray team, black team, whatever. Ask them a lot of questions. Figure out as much as you can. Organize your team. Everyone needs to know what they're doing. You don't want everyone focusing on one thing and then just leaving other things completely untouched and out of focus, and then something just completely gets skipped over. You want to communicate. This is honestly just really good with all members, like red, blue, white team, everything. You want to communicate, know your role, point a leader, that kind of stuff. But really for a red team, you're not going to be an effective red teamer if you don't have your preparation down, if you don't have your team layout. Ben?
One thing about the blue team packet, I love reading it because I always put backdoor users in there and say the teams of vendors, I'm going to add Iron Man on the account, right? Because that's going to be an account that you're going to see. When you first get there, you can't really tell what the hell versus my users. So think about that when you're reading the blue team packet, what is red team as well.
Yep. And we're going to talk about later for penetration testing, there's like a whole recon stage. This is recon, it's just different recon, right? Instead of doing Nmap scans and learning about it from a blind standpoint, we're using different sources of information to figure out everything that we know. All right, the next thing we want to do is we want to do deployment. Because we've done our preparation really well and we've read the packets and we've focused on everything, we know the IP layout, we know the default credentials, we know the operating systems they have. It is all about speed at this point. We want to get that code running before the blue team finishes typing in their password. Before they change that password, before they put up a firewall, it doesn't matter. We want to have our stuff already executed over there. Really, we're just trying to mass deploy things that are pre-written. And notice I said pre-written. Again, that goes back to the preparation. If you don't have it written beforehand, within 5 minutes, you should have changed your password and set up a firewall, and then there's nothing we can do. So if we have everything written beforehand, we anticipate what the blue team is going to do, and we run all this stuff, then we run it at minute 0, and we should have their entire system owned before we even pass the first 10 minutes of the competition. So deployment is very, very important, and if you don't catch this very critical time window, you will be locked out very quickly. All right, there's a lot of different tools for deployment, and each person likes to do it differently. Speaking from the RIT Red team, I can say we've tried all of these things, and we've learned from a lot of these different things. Ansible, not recommended. Everyone knows what Ansible is? Does anyone not know what Ansible is? Raise your hand. All right, so Ansible is a tool for system administration. So you basically write code, and it turns it into actions on remote boxes. So it's made for system administrators. Instead of logging into a box and installing a mail server, they just run their Ansible, and the Ansible will install the mail server for you. is really good. It's very stable, very well documented. But because it is so stable and well documented and thorough, it is very slow. And it's very good for system administration, but not for red teaming.
So does that mean if I want my thing to be really fast, I should just not document it?
No, that is not what that means. But yeah, so Ansible focuses a lot on like stability, and it does this thing called fact checking, where it basically learns everything about your system, and that takes like 2 minutes. And then it's like, okay, we could have just ran this program already, but that's not what Ansible's goal is. Its goal is not to be red team. So it can do it, but it's not ideal for this. Then we come later on down the list. We have Metasploit, fast, easy to use, supports everything, and that is not fast because it has a lack of documentation. It's no correlation there, Sean. But yeah, there's no documentation. It's not really lightweight. It's made more for exploitation, but you can tweak it, and you can write plugins and modules for it to make it really effective at dropping binaries and running programs right off the bat. It's just a little more work, and you're going to be digging through the weeds of the source code because there is no documentation for it. So that's another really interesting technique. There's Fabric. Anyone here heard of Fabric? I've talked about this before here. I think it's a really interesting Python library. What it does is it allows you to basically take Ansible but do it faster and all over SSH. So it's only for Linux, unfortunately, but it is really, really good. It's very fast. It's Python, so it's like write in English basically to execute this code on other systems. It's really cool, but it had a couple weird issues that we kind of didn't like. So then the RIT red team came along and we wrote this thing called detcord. And it basically just took out all the extra stuff and just focused on the core essentials of what we needed from Fabric. What's up? As soon as Windows has a great protocol for remotely administrating things that's not WMI. because getting WMI to work is awful. What's up, Ben? I cannot wait. OpenSSH will be amazing. Yeah. So the problem with detcord is it was written at mostly 4 in the morning, so things just kind of break. Jack just recently was like, hey, sudo doesn't work. And I was like, oh, no, because sudo updated, so now I got to go back and fix that. But that's just another alternative if you want to check that out. And then we have the most classic red team deployment method ever. Use SSH and bash, or psexec, or WMI, remote desktop, whatever you have right off the bat, and we call that the manual deploy. And
That one actually works.
That's a timeless thing. Even when we had all those fancy Ansible scripts for ISTS, there was a couple things that we were just SSHing in to fix at the last minute. The manual deploy, it's solid. It works 100% of the time. The problem is it is very, very, very slow, and you have to do every single box. And you can kind of script it, but it's not very good. And when you have like 10 teams of 12 boxes, you got a lot of stuff right there. You got 120 boxes. You are not going to hit that 5-minute window we talked about in the scale of the entire network. So manual deploy, don't do it. I mean, you will do it because something's going to break, but don't do it unless you absolutely have to. But the good news is you get to hand test everything and you learn more about the systems. What's up, Ben? Acceptable. Ansible is also one of the few tools that properly works with WMI, whereas like random tools just don't work with WMI for some reason. All right, so that's kind of deployment. It's, again, hitting that window, getting all your code running, and owning the system right off the bat. What are we going to run? Like, we're talking about running all this code on the system at minute 0. We're talking about having all these scripts ready to go. What are these scripts? These are the persistence, right? Persistence is all about getting a way in. There's many different forms of persistence. There's a lot of different things we can do to a system to get back in. But that is everything we're trying to do is through persistence. So it's very critical to not losing access, because even if we hit that 5-minute window, but we don't install enough things or we don't add users or anything, then as soon as they change the password, we're still back out. We can't get back in. So find a lot of different ways to get back in. 1 is none and 2 is 1. If you have 1 shell, they're probably going to find it and kill it. If there's 2 shells, they're probably going to find it and kill it, but at least you have another one to go. But then scale that up so you have like 100 shells, and then you're pretty good. All right, so a couple different things. First thing we're going to talk about is called bind shells, listening shells. they're services. They're running on the box. It's like SSH. It's always running on the box. SSH is a fantastic bind shell, but we want it not to have a password, right? We want it to not be very secure. We have a couple different things we like to use. One of them is called WaterShell. It's written by an alumni here. WaterShell, you basically go to Netcat and you just send it commands, and it'll just execute the commands through UDP. You don't get any feedback, but it's running the code on the other side, you hope. Here's another classic one, blackhole.c. It's from this old communist website I found. Yeah, but there's like, so that's just a C file, and you compile it, you run it, you set what port you want to listen on, it'll listen, and then you just netcat to it, and then you can just say, like, here's a shell, and you just run commands to your shell. There's no password, there's no authentication, it's just SSH without password, right? We have the good old classic netcat shell. You just listen on a port and mount it to bash, and then every time the socket connects, it will spawn a bash shell, connect the process to that socket, and then you're piping things in and out of bin bash. So that's a very useful one. And then we have like legitimate service backdoors. So the first ones are kind of cool, right? Like we have code execution, but a firewall is probably going to catch them. The blue team's going to be looking, and they're going to be like, oh, something looks really funny there. Like why do I see this thing was listing in my process lists? What we really like to do is we like to focus on the things that you have to keep running. Focus on the services that are already installed on the system and use those against you. So for example, if you have postfix, you're running a mail server. So postfix is up and running, Dovecot's up and running. You have to keep them on, or else your scoring checks are going to fail. You're not going to be able to send emails unless it's running. So what I like to do is I like to go into postfix and then just change up a couple little things in the configuration files. That way I can send you emails with code and your system will run them, right? Like that's kind of what we really like, because you have to keep it running. You have to allow it through your firewall. You have to have it turned on. So it's a really good way back in. It's the most effective form of persistence that you can do, is using their legitimate things against them. The RIT Red Team has an example of this. We call it Headshot. Is that the Nginx one, or is that the MySQL one?
What's going on?
Headshot. Which one is that?
Oh, that's the Nginx.
That's the Nginx one. So that's an Nginx module, and instead of giving you a web page, you just send it a command in one of the web headers, and it'll run the command and then send you the results of the command back. So it's actually really interesting. You can use curl as root, yeah. So you can use curl to execute commands on a remote web server. But like, again, that's really cool because they have to have their web server running, and their web server still functions perfectly. It'll still serve the web page, and they'll never know it's there, ideally. So bind shells, the attacker is coming to you, right? Bind shells, it's sitting there listening until the attacker comes and does stuff. It'll execute commands, set it back. The complement to that is beacons, reverse shells, callbacks, just all different names for the same thing. So whereas the bind shell is sitting and listening, waiting for the attacker to come to you, the reverse shell goes out to the attacker instead. They can be more stealthy. They're a lot harder to detect on a system, and sometimes. There's a lot of good examples of these. Empire is a classic. It's a beacon. So okay, the difference between beacons and just regular reverse shells and callbacks is beacons will call back like maybe every 60 seconds, or every 2 minutes, or every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes. Whereas sometimes a reverse shell is just a reverse connection that's always established. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the difference between those two. So like Empire, that's a beacon framework. So you can be like, okay, every 10 minutes, call back. And then that's really hard to find, because if you're not looking at that precise moment, you're never going to see the network connection listed there. That's the best way to stop those, are at the router layer or firewalls, or finding the process that's kind of running in the background. But they're very different things. Meterpreter, that's a really good one. That's a Metasploit payload. We all use this in CSEC 101 in our Metasploit lab. It's pretty cool. You can do some interesting things with that. Merlin, this is the one the CCDC Red Team made. Their goal for that is like it's all in Go. They want it to be able to run on every system, Windows, Linux. You kind of compile it. Puppy, that's another one. That is just another reverse shell. It's not a beacon. None of these are beacons except for Empire. So Empire is actually really unique in that way. But Puppy, that's another one. There's a whole bunch of them. My favorite one is this last one, though. It's like no special program. You just curl something and pipe it into bash. It's very effective, very hard to catch. That's kind of my favorite one to do. But like all these tools, they're very complex and there's a lot of code, but they don't have to be complex. The concept is very simple. You go out to a website, you're like, hey, what code do I want to run? And then you run it. You could change bash and change it to Python. Now I can run Python scripts from a web server. You could do Ruby, you could do Perl, you could do whatever you want. It's just going out to something, getting a resource, and bringing it back. And that could be over web. You could do it over any protocol. You could do it over mail. You could do it over like SSH. You could do it over literally anything. It's just going out to the attacker and then downloading stuff and running it. All right, another form of persistence, auto runs. So these are really nice because they don't require interaction from the red team. They don't require you to really do anything. They're just going to be sitting there just kind of looping. You can do a cron job. This is the one we've all seen used before, I hope. Cron jobs are pretty interesting. You go to a text file and you say, all right, every 6 minutes, run this command. And every 6 minutes, it'll just start running that command right off the bat. So that's for things that you want to constantly have running. Maybe establish a new beacon at that time or something like that. On Windows, there's task scheduler. I don't know why that's in here. We're Linux week. My bad. Bash RCM profile. Every time a user logs in, that's what's going to happen. You're going to have services, systemd services, or sysvunit services. That's just code that's running, and you can tell them to auto start. So if they're killed, restart, or start every 30 seconds. You can do a lot with them. Just things that are constantly automatically running. Startup commands, whenever you reboot, automatically going to run. And again, when you do this stuff, get another beacon back, right? Every time they reboot, you want to get another beacon. You want the red team to have a way back in via all these things. So your mindset as an attacker is, how can I take these systems, these legitimate systems that exist for a reason, and allow them to work for me as an attacker? We have a lot of just general misconfigurations, and this is the best thing about Linux. Windows guys, they have it really hard because Linux, there's just random text files, and you just modify them, and they just do stuff for you. And it's really nice, and like you can just use Vim and just, you can entirely destroy a system using only Vim, and I think that's the most beautiful thing. So some classics, web shells. There's like the China chopper. Anyone ever heard of the China chopper? It's like a one line, it's like what, like 30 characters maybe? It's a web shell. It's like 30 characters, right? You just put that in a web directory, enable PHP, and boom, you have a shell in the system. SSH misconfiguration, SSH keys, allow root logon, so keys, then you don't even need a password. If they never catch the key, you just log right in without a password each time. Root login, make sure, again, you always want to be able to log in as root, so that's just a convenient thing. This is Windows again. I forgot to clean these slides, I'm sorry. There's a PAM backdoor, that's really convenient. Anyone know? Can someone just give me a TLDR on what PAM is?
Open authentication system for Linux. That's not the password.
Okay, so it's not the password file, it's an open authentication system. Do you know what PAM stands for?
Pluggable authentication.
Pluggable authentication modules. And the key word there is pluggable, because when something is pluggable, it means you can write plugins for it. So if you have this very pluggable system that's easily configured and you can write plugins for it, then red team, we just want to write plugins for it, right? Except instead of actually checking the password, like that's a lot of hard work and you have to do that right. We just let everyone in, right? So why not just write a pluggable module that says, hey, can I get in? Yes, and then that works. So you can do some crazy things with PAM. Again, using only Vim, you can make it so there's no password. Any password works. Any user can log in. Or you can gotta get and make actual modules that are a lot harder to find. But that's just kind of an interesting thing. Add users. Make them sudoable, right there. Etsy sudoers, just echo something into it that says all, no password all, and any user can just sudo any command and become root without having a password at all. So just a lot of simple things that you can do just to break misconfigurations, and most of them are just sitting around in text files. All right, and then collection, figure out what the blue team is doing, steal their firewalls, steal their scripts that they're running. We like to look at what red team is putting on the system, what they're downloading to use against us, and then we know what's going on. Watch firewalls again. This is a tool we wrote called Campfire. It's written by our boy Jim right here. That just downloads all their firewalls and ships back to us so we can watch it. And we go, hey, this is what the blue team's firewall is at this point. Key logging, what are they typing? What commands are they running? This is all valuable intel to the red team because then we have better insight onto what they're doing. And steal data hidden on the boxes. This one's more of a real life thing, less of competitions, but actual emails, things like that. There's a lot of stories from pen testers where like going onto an email server, they looked through the emails and they found passwords in the emails or that kind of thing. Or in a database, there was some plain text credentials and then they could further use that to look around. Again, sorry, just going back to this collection thing. If you don't know what your goal is though, you're not gonna be effective, so just know what your goal is beforehand. For most of our stuff, our goal is to just stop blue team, so we're not worried about stealing data or anything, but if your goal is to steal data, you have to know that beforehand and then set up everything in a way that you can't steal that. Here's some of my personal favorite tricks that I like to use. You can remap any key on the keyboard using that text file right there. You can export the thing called prompt command, and every time you hit enter in a shell, it runs that command. So that's a really useful one for like IP tables, right? Every time you hit enter, just flush the firewall. You can make the computer just beep, and that's not through a speaker, that's through the motherboard. The problem with that is most of the stuff we do is in VMs, so you can't beep through the VM to the hypervisor. But if they're on a hardware, you can make it beep. You can kernel panic the system. It'll just crash by using 2 echo commands right there. This one's really fun. You can turn an entire file system into a website. So if you're root and you run this, and then on port 8080, if you just navigate to the IP address on port 8080 and you said like whatever port 8080 / Etsy password, it'll just give you Etsy password, or /bin bash, it'll just download bash. So that's a really good one if you're just trying to like get stuff off their system. It's kind of fun. You can't execute commands, but you can steal everything from them. Allow root to log in through your SSH. Again, modify another text file. Keylog a process. This one's pretty cool. It'll just spit out anything that's input into the PID that you're given. So like if you have their bash shell and their process ID number, just throw an strace on it and you'll just watch all the keys that they're typing get listed out there. Joe?
Do you run that OpenSSL command as root?
Yes. Well, if you don't, you can run it as any user, but you're only going to get access to the files that that user has. So it's just a nifty one, and they don't even need a web server installed because OpenSSL is installed by every Linux distro by default. So yeah. And then you can sinkhole resources, so like Google or Stack Overflow, kind of things that Blue Team would be using, GitHub, Google Drive, anything that they're going to be using to download their scripts. I like to just block them right off the bat so that they can't get all their scripts. So that's a fun thing to do. But yeah, so any questions about red teaming in particular, like just how we do it or thoughts? And a lot of it is like, oh, it's all these like random things. It's just random things, but that's not what makes it hard, because a lot of this stuff is on GitHub or on Google. The hard part is putting it all together and planning your operation. That way, as soon as you hit go, it's scripted out and runs automatically. And that's where red teaming is actually difficult, because finding these little backdoors is pretty easy, but actually getting them to do it in an efficient and useful manner, that's the hard part. So like, that's why I'm not really saying like, oh, here's how you install an Empire beacon. Well, that's really cool. You can find 100 tutorials on that. What's actually cooler is maybe getting an Empire beacon to run every time they press enter, or like using the auto schedulers to run an Empire beacon and that kind of stuff. Does that make sense? All right, moving on to penetration testing here. So this is like the complement to red teaming. This is more testing the system. So we're not really focusing on just like getting a billion different ways of persistence. Usually like 1 or 2 ways for persistence is pretty good. And it's more testing the system. We're going to try and figure out what that's doing and approach it from more of a black box standpoint. So steps to take for this: we want to get information. This is called reconnaissance, or recon, a lot of people just call it. Once we have the information, we have what services are running, then we want to get access. We want to find an exploit for those services or find some way to use that service to get on the system. Once we have that, we want to try and get root. Once you escalate your privileges up to root, we can do whatever we want, and then we, again, install persistence or start finding your data, start doing the collection, focus on your mission of like, what else can I find on the network, do lateral movement, and that kind of thing. But again, you have to know your mission or you're not going to be effective at what you do. Recon, there's a lot of tools for this. The most famous one we've all heard, we learn it in every single CSEC class at RIT, Nmap. So you just run some magical commands and be like, yeah, here's the services that are listening on this. This is a flag. This is what I like to use when I'm not trying to be stealthy at all. It's the most aggressive scan type. It'll detect the version, and F, I think, is the most top 1,000 ports or something like that. So there's just a lot of different commands. And if you're actually doing like a network where you don't want to be detected and you're trying to fly really low under the radar, don't run that command. There's a lot of different commands for that. You can even script it. But for something like a demo today or just running a competition, that Nmap command is pretty cool. That's going to list out the services. So like, oh, here's a web server running Apache, and this is the version number. Hopefully you can get that. Maybe it has a mail server too, FTP. Then you get the version numbers from that, you drop it into the CVE, and you see if there's any known exploits, right? Maybe it's an old version of Apache that has an RCE. Maybe they're running like a version of WordPress or something, but you'll be able to find all that out and see if someone's found an exploit in that. If you can't find something like that, maybe just try and learn about it, like common FTP misconfiguration, right? Maybe there's something about this protocol that is commonly messed up, or that you can use to get in or to find some sort of information. And Googling things, like a lot of this is just about recon. You don't know anything on the system, but once you kind of take these steps, you just try and learn more about it. This is just a little bonus here. It's called explain shell. That's just on there because like if you don't know what all these flags are, you can just drop a command into explain shell and it'll be like, here's what that command does and describe each one. So if you see stuff on this, just use that. It's kind of useful and you don't know what it does. All right, web. If you have a website, there's a lot of different web scanners out there. It seems like there's like 1,000 just on Kali Linux alone. But Nikto, that's a really big one. So you just put in a host and it'll just like run things, tell you information, and it'll do a lot of this for you. It'll be like, oh, hey, it's running this, or here might be SQL injection at this place, and it'll do a lot of this searching. Dirbuster, that just tries to brute force different paths on the host and be like, okay, here's an admin panel that you may not have discovered, and just find more pages on the website that maybe you can use to increase your attack surface. And then SQL map, that's all focused on like SQL injection and doing different things on the website to interact with the database to then try and get code execution or steal extra data or something like that. But again, all of this is from an outside perspective. We don't know too much about the system. We have access to the service. We're just trying to run remotely. Once we get on the box or you find some way to execute commands, then we want to do a lot of local recon. What services are running? What else is listening? What ports did I not discover initially? Maybe they're running something on like port 8,000 that you never would have caught because your Nmap scan only went up to 1,000, that kind of thing. Maybe they're doing a weird port. You can find out more local host services, that kind of stuff. So netstat, SS, that's going to tell you what's going on with that. Find running processes. Maybe you see like the cron service running. Then you want to figure out, okay, what's the cron? Like what's running every 10 minutes, that kind of thing. So PS, top, that's going to show you that kind of stuff. Check your configuration files. I'm assuming you're not root, so these are going to be read-only. So you're just trying to find more information about the system, right? You want to know, like, okay, we know VSFTPD is running. What's in the VSFTPD conf? Like, what is in there that we can use to kind of help us get more information about the system? And it's all about just using the little pieces that you find to find out more. No, I thought, okay. Once we have that, we want to ideally get access. So if you did find a legitimate exploit, or you have like credentials or something, you can use Metasploits, exploits, and scanners to kind of get in. So like the scanners are good for like SSH login and that kind of stuff. And then the exploits are good if like, oh, here's a really old, I don't know, what's a vulnerable service? Just an old service that has a RCE in it, and you can, Metasploit probably has a module for it, you get in that. Brute forcing, that's another famous way. Just try top 10,000 passwords against MySQL, that kind of thing. So that's just another common technique. Privilege escalation, this is a little bit more difficult. It used to be a lot bigger. I feel like there's a lot, like, there's always the common things you see, like SUIDs and stuff, but I feel like we've gotten to the point where we've really fine-tuned a lot of them out of a system. So a system administrator really has to do something dumb, or it has to be a really old system in order to really get something like this. But there's also a lot of exploits that will just get you root on a system once you're already on. Russ?
I believe Linux Script Checker 2 has been released.
Ooh.
I think it's maybe, it might be just for kernel exploits, but I believe the second version is released.
Okay, that's really good to know. So yeah, so this tool, Linux Priv Checker, I think it's a bash script. It just tries all this stuff for you, sees if you can do something. It basically takes these guides and turns them into a script and just kind of auto runs it. But if you're really looking to get into this, here's some really good cheat sheets on it. And then yeah, check out Linux Priv Checker and Linux Priv Checker 2 apparently. The common techniques that you're going to read about here is find SUID binaries. Someone want to give me a TLDR on what SUID is and what it stands for? Josh?
Run a script as the user who owns the script, not as the user who owns the script.
Yep. So it's set user ID. So like he said, oh, okay.
It doesn't work on scripts. It only works on binaries.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, so it's not scripts, it's for executables. But if an executable is marked as set UID by a user, then whenever anyone runs that, if they have permissions to access it, it'll be run as the user that set the SUID bit, not the user that is running it. So, for example, if by default you run who am I, it's going to run who am I as your username, and you'll see, okay, you are Micah in this case. But if you make who am I root, I'm not sure if this actually works on who am I, but like there's a lot of different binaries that are really weird nowadays with how SUID works. It doesn't even work sometimes. But for example, like theoretically, if you set UID as a root, the who am I binary, even though I'm Micah, when I call who am I, it's going to be running as root, and it'll be like, oh, you're root, right? Because the binary itself is running as root, not as Micah, because this has been set. And it sounds really bad, and you're like, why would this even exist? There are a lot of use cases where this does exist. Back in like a couple years ago, you couldn't use ping or certain features of ping unless you had root permissions because it needed to access raw sockets, and I don't think you can open up raw sockets unless you're a root user. So there was a lot of like really interesting things that had to be done until they put it in the kernel now. So again, you see SUID going away a lot because they've really tried to be like, hey, let's not have things running as root if you're another user, because that's bad. It is. But there is different reasons where you would need something like this. For example, SU, the SU where you can sign in, or sudo where you can run commands as root, it has to be root. Because even if you're Micah, it can never execute commands as root unless the sudo binary is running as root. Does that make sense? So there's valid reasons for this, but the attack space is getting a lot smaller. But what you want to do is you want to see if you can get them to execute a command or give you root. One of the classic ones is like nano. So if nano is SUID, then when you call nano on a file, it will be reading and writing to that file as root, which means you can read and write any file on the system. So if you're Micah and you can use nano as root, then you modify etc sudoers to say, hey, Micah can now log in as root, and now Micah can become root. Does that make sense? Any questions? You can find a lot of guides on this. It's pretty interesting. Another thing, world writable files, kind of the same concept, except with like config files. So maybe you could get like, I don't know, there's different examples. Maybe you could postfix to do something, or you could change something so a different service is always running as a user, or maybe so it allows unauthenticated or change where it's authenticating from, that kind of stuff. There's a million different things you can do with config files. Can you get it to execute arbitrary commands, that kind of stuff. A lot of services will just run arbitrary commands if you set it in the config files, that kind of thing. So it's all about finding things that you shouldn't have access to, but you do, and that's kind of privilege escalation. Then again, complete your mission. So we want to know our goal, download the files, dump databases, read emails, find more boxes, and kind of pivot from there, and then write up a report and try and get people to fix that, and that's kind of the pen testing thing. Or if you're using it maliciously, maybe try and write a report so you get paid or that kind of thing, or you can actually steal stuff. So good resources for learning. These are all very like pen testing thing. Hack the box. There's a lot of different boxes that are set up for this style. Like maybe scan it, find a cool exploit or that kind of thing. Use a Metasploit to get in. It'll kind of help teach you that mindset. DVWA, the damn vulnerable web app. That's a really good one for web app. It's a massive web app that's misconfigured to allow you to do different types of web exploits and everything against it. And you can set like easy, medium, and hard to do different levels of stuff. So if you're looking into getting into like web pen testing, that's a really big thing. For red teaming, GitHub and Twitter, these are like my favorite ones. You can find a lot just by following some good red teamers on GitHub and Twitter. They'll usually be like, hey, look at this cool trick I found. And they're like, oh, that's really cool. Maybe I could implement that into my tool or that kind of thing. And then just talking to people who do red team. There's a lot of us red teamers at RIT. So if you want a red team, just talk to us. Ben?
My personal favorite is Hub because they have vulnerable DMs attack.
Okay.
And they also have write-ups.
Ooh.
Really good to start or get stuck without doing write-ups.
You can find all the write-ups for Hack the Box too. I do like how you can download the VMs though instead of having to VPN in. So I should add that to this. Hub. Yeah, so Hub's another really cool one. It's basically like Hack the Box, except you get to download the VMs. And I think it's actually older than Hack the Box, but I don't know. All right. Any questions? My GIF is not working. That's sad. Any questions? What? All right, I didn't mean to start a GIF debate. Matt, what's up?
Let's say you got like a reverse shell on your system and you're just a low-risk user, and
If you're a low-priv user, so like let's say you got the reverse shell through like a web app, right? So you're gonna be running as www data or like Apache or whatever. The only thing you're really gonna be able to read is other web stuff or maybe like some global configurations. Like you can read, I could be wrong, you can read Etsy password as any user. So you can get a list of all the usernames and then maybe you could use that to increase, like maybe brute force some of those, find out something like that. You can read global configurations, so like SSH. So maybe they, if there's directories, maybe different home page or home directories will have files laying around in them that you can read, that kind of stuff. What's up, Russ?
To kind of add on to what you're saying, when I was going to play with CP, I did a lot of like packet blocks and like those CPF style boxes. A lot of times, if they give you like a www user, they usually want you like I said, to look around in like the web directory and like look at the web configuration files. And like I know for WordPress, like there's a lot of like sensitive information in a lot of the WP config files. Another one I see like all the time in those CPF style things is like Etsy password will be world writable. So you can just write your password to your account from there. That's like a really common one for whatever reason. So.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of just different, like, if you're doing things like Hack the Box or Vuln Hub, there's going to be a path. There is some sort of thing. So again, global configuration files, really anything you have access to, and you can use like the find command to just find everything you have access to and that kind of stuff. So just kind of pivot as much as you possibly can to look at different things. So any other thoughts or questions? No, it's working, but not when I hit present. It's really weird. Whatever. Any other questions? All right. I think Scott and Choi have cooked up a pretty cool demo for you guys. So I don't think there's a link on here, Scott.
It is demo held now.
All right. So there's a link posted on Demo Help in Workplace. Go and find that. I'm also going to drop a link here in the slides if you all need to find it through that. Does anyone have a laptop? My Spotify's broken, so I can't play music. Oh, wait, it just worked again.
Jack. Can I break the stream stuff real quick? No.